Yeah, hi. My name is Garo Marwasian, and I'm the attorney for the Dole family. Let me tell you the story of the Dole incident as it's become known. Back in 1989, February 11th, 1989, there was going to be a bridal shower. A bridal shower in which Melinda Dole was going to be marrying later on, of course, Terry Pow Pow. You see, the family, the Dole family, a few months earlier, 6 months earlier, had a very sad incident occurred. Their mom had passed away, and so they didn't really have any cause for celebration for about 6 months until this incident, this bridal shower. The bridal shower was set at their home in Cerritos, California, in a neighborhood that is comprised of mainly white Americans and some Asian families and a couple of Latino families, but no Samoans. The Dole family was the only Samoan family in the neighborhood. The bridal shower began at around noon that day, and by about 5 o'clock, the men began to also show up. Up until 5, it was ladies only. And by around 7, 8 o'clock, there was music playing, people dancing in the house and some in the garage. And there were about 40, 50 people at the home. The Dole family consisted of 5 sisters and 2 brothers, Tafilele Dole and David Dole. And the sisters were Melinda, Sharon, Emily, Clementine, and Orlando. What transpired in the next few hours is completely unimaginable. What started out to be a quiet bridal shower ended up being a very ugly scene when the sheriff's department showed up. By midnight that evening, there were over 100 sheriff's deputies at the residence, storming the residence in full riot gear. There was a helicopter overhead and a canine unit along with a tear gas unit on its way. What was it that led to the events to get so out of place there? This was nothing more than a bridal shower, as I indicated earlier. Let me see if I could explain to you what had occurred. At around 8 o'clock that evening, and it wasn't that late, it was a Saturday night, a family a few houses down called the police. They called the police because a lady that was 8 months pregnant was having difficulty getting sleep. Mind you, it's only 8 o'clock in the evening, because she claimed the music that was being played was Hawaiian or Samoan music being played, that the beat from the music was keeping her up. Her husband, Mr. James Boone was his name, admitted later in trial that he was a bit racist, that he felt like if he came up to these large, dark people and asked them to turn the music down, they might resist, and so he figured he'd just call the cops. And so he did call the cops. The cops showed up, and when the cops first showed up and they saw Emily, they recognized her as Mount Fiji. At the time, she was a fairly well-known entertainer, playing the role of Mount Fiji. The character was someone that had never been pinned before, never been put on the map. When the officers recognized her as Mount Fiji, they began to joke around with her. And I think the whole trouble maybe began then when they saw this as a challenge. They saw these large Samoans, and here they are, police officers, far smaller in size, but each one of them had a gun, a backup gun, a shotgun in their vehicle, and a billy club, and all these other weapons, and they could certainly take care of these Samoans if they wanted to, and they wanted to. Because what happened over the next couple of hours is somewhat hard to believe, but they asked Emily to turn the music down. Emily complied and asked the guests to bring the gathering inside the home, and they turned the music down. 15 minutes later, the sheriff's deputies came back and thanked the family for turning the music down. So all the trouble was over, so you would think. But the sergeant that was in command that evening, a gentleman by the name of Unland, Willie Unland, decided to break up this party. He had already made up his mind that he was going to bust it up and send everybody away. He was going to do it by force if he couldn't get them to leave by his command. even though the music was turned down and everything seemed to be fine, he called for more patrol units to gather around the corner from the residence. And within half an hour, by 9:30 that evening, he had over 10 patrol units, a helicopter overhead, and he was monitoring this gathering rather closely. They claim, the sheriffs claim, that over the next few moments they received 3 separate phone calls of neighbors complaining of people fighting with sticks and knives right outside the Dole residence. Not just any people, but Pacific Islander types. Now, by Pacific Islander types, in that neighborhood there were no other Pacific Islander types except the Samoan family, of course. And curiously enough, the people that had called never came forward. As a matter of fact, up until today, there's no evidence that any calls were made, except for what the police say. You see, when 911 calls are made, normally they are recorded, and they are recorded on a tape player, and if that tape player breaks, there was a backup that would record it. But both these systems were at the sheriff's department. And wouldn't you know it, that night, the primary recording system had broken, so they claim. And guess what? What a coincidence. And the secondary system had also was broken. So there's no evidence of any of these calls coming in. We think that's rather convenient for the sheriff's department to just happen to have both these units that are at their station to be broken. But let's get beyond that. There were computer-generated numbers that are recorded as these calls are made, and those numbers don't check out. When we searched for those folks, we found people that lived many miles away, and the other numbers were completely unrelated, and they had nothing to do with this incident. So let's come back to the incident itself. Now we have some 10 plus cars gathered around the corner, a helicopter above. When the sergeant asked the helicopter above, "Hey, what's going on down there? I hear people are fighting with sticks and knives. Can you look down below and see if they're fighting?" The helicopter observer looked below and said, "Negative, no fights. Seems to be a peaceful gathering and people are going home." That information should have led this sergeant to go away, because everything is okay. It's a peaceful gathering. The neighborhood is not being in any way upset. But rather than go away, he ordered his troops to gather and to go to this residence. And within the next 30 minutes, 60 minutes, there were some 54 patrol cars and 100 deputies at the house of the Dole residents, at the home of the Doles. And when they arrived, they came with riot gear. And when David Dole came up to greet Sergeant Unland as he pulled up in front of his residence, Sergeant Unland didn't really want to talk. He basically said, "Tell all your people to get the heck out of here." And he used far stronger language, unfortunately. And he disrespected his father, his family, and Sergeant Unland just did not want to hear any excuses. He just wanted everybody out. He didn't want to listen to any rhyme or reason. David offered to let the sergeant go through the house to satisfy himself that there was nothing going on here that's improper, that everything is okay and no one's breaking the law. But the sergeant wouldn't have any of that. So David realized the sergeant is not being rational and using very foul language, decided to go inside the house and call 911, which he did. The 911 operator told him to go out and see the sergeant in charge by the name of Unland. David, at the time, while he was in the house, didn't realize this is the same sergeant that just threatened us and threatened the family and threatened to put everybody in jail. Thinking the operator knew what she was talking about, David came out to the front door. The rest of his family inside the home encouraged him not to go out because they could see the fire in these deputies' eyes. But David said, "Oh no, you know what, I'll just go out there with my hands up and I'll talk to him, everything will be all right." Mind you, most of the Doles were college educated. David was a star athlete at San Jose State, had gone to college for 4 years, and his sister Emily was a star athlete in the Olympic level, and again, college educated, and they both thought, it's just a misunderstanding, everything would be okay. By the time David got to the front gate, more than 10 deputies swarmed him and began beating him with metal flashlights and metal billy clubs. They beat him so hard that when he tried to cover his head, one of the blows from the billy clubs struck him in the hand and broke his metacarpal bone, the bone between the wrist and the knuckle, in half. He was struck over the head on numerous occasions and numerous blows to the head that caused over 50 stitches to later be put in to stop the bleeding. And all this for no good reason. There were no fights, there was no rioting, there was no throwing of any items at the police, and yet the police had decided they were going to bust it up. And when David was being beaten, a couple of others came to his rescue and pulled him in the house away from the deputies. Now more deputies came to the front of the house, and within the next few moments the entire force from Lakewood and Norwalk and Paramount, all the neighboring sheriff's stations came, and they stormed this home full of scared ladies and their significant others, spouses, who didn't know what was going on. They came from the front doors, they came from the rear doors, they came from the side windows, and from the rear they would tell them to go to the front, and as they would go to the front, from the front the deputies would tell them to go to the back. In the meantime, they're beating him, they're hitting him, and it was just melee, and there was no provocation for it whatsoever, and yet they beat them senseless. And not only the men, the women also, the old men. You look at what they did to Mr. Arthur Dole. Here's a guy in his 60s. They beat him so bad they broke his ribs. He had bruises all over his body. And this was his home. This was the day that he was going to celebrate giving his daughter's hand in marriage. And first celebration they've had in over 6 months since the passing of his wife. And yet, this is the kind of thanks they get from their own police force. There were numerous others who suffered injuries that caused the bleeding, and it seemed like the largest folks at the gathering were beaten the most severely. The police officers used these metal batons they call PR-24s. They used their flashlights. There were 6-cell or 4-cell metal flashlights. They beat them over the head, they beat them all over their body. They even set up a gauntlet. As people walked through the front of the house and onto the front yard, they were beaten. Thank goodness there was a neighbor across the street, a gentleman by the name of Douglas Botts, whose daughter had seen the police arriving and told her dad to come up, and he stood up on a jacuzzi and videotaped most of this incident. And that videotape is what became the linchpin of this entire case, because without it, it would have been the Samoans' word against the deputies' word, even though there were numerous neighbors that came to assist and to testify on behalf of the Samoans. The deputies were probably going to be more credible in the eyes of most jurors, but the videotape, I think, was what tipped the balance, the scales in our favor.
Court cases often come down to your word against someone else's, and if that someone else is a cop, you could be in trouble. This is the story of a family whose word was challenged not by one officer, but by more than 40. It all began with a bridal shower that got a little too loud and then got ugly. Would the jury believe the police, the partygoers, or the evidence that took everyone by surprise? Here's Mike Taibbi.
The deputies are involved in a fight. We are rolling rescue.
131 said all serious units. I'd like to come out.
Sergeant William Unland of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department was calling for backup,
Breaking up a large 415A unit.
and he got lots of them. There was the Skynight police helicopter hovering low overhead, and no fewer than 54 squad cars, around 100 deputies, all to help him break up a 415A, a party.
And it had been
In a court deposition, Unland remembered.
So I determined that since alcoholic beverages were being drunk, in addition to everything else, that it was only going to get worse, it wasn't going to get better.
The party was a bridal shower being thrown by Arthur Dole for his daughter Melinda, one of his 7 children. 40 to 50 members of this close-knit Samoan American family showed up to celebrate, with traditional foods and with music. The music was a little too loud for neighbor Jim Boone, and that's where the problem started.
Loud enough that was like boom, 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 you know, and type of music that, you know, it's kind of hard to go to sleep to.
Boone dialed 911.
I just told him that there was a loud party going on, and that my wife was pregnant, and that she was, you know, needed to get some sleep.
415 E. Edward, Head 03 in Norin or Naran. Loud music, informants desire.
2 deputies pulled up to the Doles' house, asked them to turn down the music, and then left. 15 minutes later, though, Sergeant Unlin was calling for backup, convinced, as he would later report, that the party was going to have to be dispersed to protect the welfare of the neighborhood.
It's a large group of very large Samoans, and I want to be sure we're going to take action before we go in. 10-4.
Unlin said he heard calls on the radio confirming his fears, a knife fight.
There's an update, take 292. A second caller advises they're still fighting with sticks and knives.
This time, when Unlin and his backup deputies pulled up to the Doles' house, things weren't nearly so agreeable. Arthur Doles' son, David, a former football player, was especially menacing, Unlin said.
They were yelling and screaming, waving their arms. David was standing in front of the gate, taking a combative stance, challenging me to come in and make him leave the party.
Unlin says he ordered the partygoers to disperse or be arrested, a warning the helicopter repeated.
Skyline 131 Sam, they seem to be adhering to my initial broadcast, and they're starting to disperse. They're walking.
A few partygoers left, but according to the deputies, many more remained and showed no signs of obeying.
131 Sam, I'm going to have to declare this a 997.
131 Sam is declaring this 997 unit.
Code 3 from the station.
Unlin declared a code 997. All available deputies respond to assist and began arresting the Samoan partygoers. David Dole would be the first. Unlin says that as he reached for Dole, he was hit with a barrage of rocks and bottles, scarring his helmet and knocking him unconscious.
Initially, upon regaining consciousness and stumbling out to my car, I was not in control of the deputies at that point.
Radio reports from the scene painted a picture of mayhem and fear.
Yes, some more units moving around. We're taking rocks and bottles. We got several deputies injured. Deputies involved in a fight. Several deputies injured.
Spurred on by those frantic calls for help, deputies poured in until the street was clogged with patrol cars and riot gear-clad officers. One deputy said he hadn't seen anything like it since Vietnam, and he and his fellow deputies documented the mayhem in dozens of reports noting attack after attack by the Samoans, many weighing more than 200 pounds. But the deputies reported they gradually gained the upper hand and began clearing this small house, arresting partygoers and hauling them off to the station. As proof of the ferocity of the attack, deputies cataloged their injuries. More than 10 officers, including Sergeant Unlin, described bruises, cuts, and scrapes, inflicted, they said, by everything from beer bottles to boulders. 4 days later, with charges of riot and assault filed against 35 of the partygoers,
these are the rocks that were thrown. And
Sheriff Sherman Block displayed the weapons his deputies faced and praised their conduct.
That act of throwing the cinder block at the deputies, which is a deadly act, resulted in a shower of rocks.
Even the district attorney got into the act, likening the Samoans to an unruly British soccer mob.
There was nothing, no rocks or bottles were anywhere.
But the Doles said it didn't happen that way at all. They said it was the police who rioted against innocent civilians.
I didn't cuss at anybody, I didn't hit anybody, I didn't throw anything. The whole time I was just being beaten that whole night. I didn't see nobody resisting arrest or anything like that.
And there was one more thing, something neither the deputies on the scene nor the partygoers knew about at first. Across the street, a video camera was running, and it was pointed straight at the Doles' house.
Returning to our story, what started as a festive bridal shower turned into an ugly confrontation with police. Those at the party say the police started it. The police say they were just defending themselves after partygoers started throwing rocks and bottles. What no one realized at first was that a video camera had captured the scene on tape. Here again, Mike Taibbi.
The neighbor's videotape. David Dole says those 17 minutes of shaky images show the truth of what happened that night.
They treated us, our family, like animals that night. They didn't care if it was female or male. They just, everybody was beaten, and it was terrible.
Dole says Sergeant William Unland's version of events is simply not true.
Unland says 4 of the suspects rush him. He hits 3 of them with his nightstick, and then is hit with a bottle of beer to the right eye, a full bottle of beer, he specifies, a full can to his jaw, and then a large boulder to his helmet, which momentarily knocks him unconscious. What about his description? True? False?
False.
All of it?
All of it? All of it is false, because
Dole said he'd only been at the party about 10 minutes when the music was turned down at the request of the first deputies who'd responded to neighbor Jim Boone's complaint.
Then they said, okay, you guys have a good night, enjoy it, take care, and they went on their way.
But in minutes, they returned.
And I asked him, you know, is there a problem? Can I help you with anything? And he just swung the door open, which just missed my chin, and I backed up. And he started just using bad language, foul language, you know, just F out of my face. I want this effing party out of here. And they just came out. I mean, they rushed.
You had your hands up?
And I had my hands up, yeah. And they just rushed me, yeah. They rushed me with the batons, flashlights. I mean, they were hitting me with everything.
Dole says he endured a beating that left him with a broken hand and a deep head wound, among other injuries, and that he watched helplessly as his friends and relatives were assaulted, including his then 62-year-old father, who suffered 2 broken ribs.
Did you see anybody throw anything?
Nothing.
Did you directly hear anyone shout anything by way of a threat or a challenge?
No. No.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Dole says the beatings were unprovoked and vicious.
It was like a gauntlet where when they were escorting people out, they're hitting them and beating them, you know, as they're going out. I thought right there I was going to die.
David Dole remembers lying in a squad car while the explosion of violence that used to be a bridal shower raged outside, and listening to a paramedic argue with a deputy.
He's saying to the deputy, we have to take this guy out of here, we're going to lose him. And the deputy's cussing to the paramedic, F you, you do your job right here or he doesn't go anywhere.
And he remembers waking up in the hospital and hearing that he faced charges of riot and assault against police officers, and being terrified at the prospect of prison.
There's no way, if I'm being found guilty for doing nothing, I was in the suicidal state.
They have a criminal charge against you, and you're saying that if you are found guilty, you considered suicide?
Yeah, I'm not going to spend 1 day in jail. You know, I was lost.
But it was in the hospital that Dole remembered something else the paramedic had told him.
And he was going, if you can hear me, there's a neighbor across the street. He videotaped what happened.
2 years before the tape of Rodney King's beating at the hands of LA City Police, the Doles' across-the-street neighbor knew that only pictures would show the truth of what happened that night. The tape shows several instances of deputies clubbing partygoers who appear to be offering no resistance whatsoever.
That's Olanda. That's when they were beating on her, kicking her, using batons, flashlight.
Here, a partygoer is rushed out of the house, only to be collared by a club-wielding deputy. Here, a civilian already on the ground is surrounded by officers pummeling him with batons. And watch as this deputy, guarding another partygoer on the ground, rains down a two-hander.
That videotape was enough to convince a jury to acquit David Dole and 2 others of the felony charges they faced, and to convince the prosecutors to drop the charges against the 26 other partygoers who'd been arrested. But the Doles wanted more. They wanted to go after the deputies, and they wanted a public apology from the department. So they filed a civil suit against the county and its sheriff's department, alleging police brutality and civil rights violations.
We all knew that we were right. We didn't do anything wrong.
The 7.5-month trial took place at the same time as the OJ Simpson murder trial, a block away, so few paid attention. But there were 38 partygoers who signed on as plaintiffs. If the county lost, it was going to cost millions.
David, what would have been different if this videotape wasn't made?
Probably, I don't know. It'd be just our word against theirs. And
the Doles might have had the videotape, but the sheriff's department had no fewer than 70 deputies willing to testify, dozens of police reports, photographs of injuries, and physical evidence, bloodstained boulders and cinder blocks, beer bottles, and more, all to back up its version of events. One after the other, the deputies repeated the same story. The partygoers had started the riot, pelting the deputies with a barrage that ended just before that videotape started rolling.
I couldn't understand how a simple bridal shower party could have unraveled into this riot gear arriving officers. I was shocked.
Patricia Alberico, Kathleen Keating, Claude Bowen, and Daniel Hackney were 4 of the 12 jurors. They knew that the key to finding the truth of what happened that night lay in that videotape. Some of the images were disturbing, but the tape showed just 17 minutes of a much longer conflict. If the jurors wanted the truth, they'd have to determine what had happened before that tape began.
When we retired to deliberate, Patricia says, I know how we can prove conclusively who's telling the truth.
One of the officers in his testimonies said, well, not one of them, several of them, many of them, most of them, that rocks and bottles, fearing for their lives. And he called in to the dispatch.
Get some more units on the land. We're taking rocks and bottles.
Those radio transmissions were time-coded, and they were blaring out from the squad car radios and picked up on that neighbor's videotape.
131, Sam, I have at least 4 deputies injured.
The jurors simply matched the radio calls with the videotape and discovered that the video began rolling just a minute and a half after that frantic call for assistance. Not nearly enough time for that 20-minute barrage the deputies said they'd endured.
We're hearing over the police airwaves this officer yelling, screaming, saying they're being assaulted and they need backup because they're taking rocks and bottles. And not a one. And the videotape goes on.
And you don't see any, and you don't hear anything hitting the ground.
They would roll the videotape, and what you saw was this neatly manicured, freshly mowed front yard at Putting Green Lane with no rocks or bottles in sight.
But what about those pictures showing battered and bruised deputies?
Superficial wounds. There was this great barrage of rocks and bottles that they claimed that went on for 20 minutes. The injuries would have been more severe and more numerous.
And what injuries there were, the jurors said, were probably accidentally inflicted by deputies against each other. And what about that photograph of the boulder with blood on it?
It became clear to us that it was a phony, that it had been staged.
The jurors weren't buying any of the deputy stories, and they say they were particularly bothered by what they called a code of silence in the sheriff's department.
Not a single deputy out of 43 or so that testified named one other deputy at the scene, but guess what? They could all name the unknown Samoan American in the courtyard 20 feet across the yard in the dark who threw the rock that hit another deputy.
And what did that tell you about the truthfulness of
They were lying.
They were lying.
They were flat out lying.
Compensatory damages in the sum of $180,000.
The jury found for the Doles on all counts, imposing the biggest police brutality verdict in history, nearly $16 million.
You can't beat the truth, and that's what prevailed in this case.
End of story? Not quite, because the sheriff's department, says Assistant Chief Robert Spear, has never accepted that verdict, despite what the tape shows and doesn't show.
Do you see in that 17-minute tape a single rock or bottle anywhere on the ground, in the air, in flight?
I could personally not see it, no.
Do you see a single incident in which it's clear to you that someone who is not a uniformed deputy is an aggressor, is taking a swing at anybody?
I don't see anything in particular in that videotape that would show that.
The jury believed that the police, the deputies, conspired and told untruths.
Yes, and we have another jury that stated that OJ Simpson didn't kill Nicole.
Spear says that 5 of the partygoers admitted after the trial that they had withheld evidence that some of the Samoans had in fact attacked the deputies.
Where were those people?
They were there. They were there. They were, by their own admission,
saying they didn't remember things, they didn't see things that they later told us was not accurate, that they lied.
Videotape or not, Spearer says, the whole truth has yet to come out.
What do you think happened?
Well, I think that there is truth to both sides of the story. I really do believe...
Well, it's either excessive or it wasn't. It was either provoked or it wasn't. There were either rocks and bottles or there weren't.
Well, I believe that there were items thrown.
Do you believe that all your deputies told the truth in their reports following that incident?
I have no reason to believe that any specific deputy did not.
And in fact, none of the deputies involved has been disciplined because, Spearer says, no one could identify any of the deputies accused of brutality. The county has exhausted its appeals and the Doles have received their money. But there's one thing the family is not getting.
Does this department owe an apology to those people?
If we clearly knew that there was inappropriate and excessive force, and if we knew who did it, and we knew against whom, and if we knew that those people had no part, then yes, I believe an apology is appropriate.
But not yet.
Well, not yet.